A first impression. Mark sat at his desk, a polished piece of oak that reflected the dim glow of the office lights, his eyes skimming through a stack of resumes. He prided himself on being thorough, every applicant scrutinized, every resume dissected. The position he was hiring for was important, one that would impact the company's future. As the head of hiring for his department, Mark held the reins, making decisions on who would enter the company and who would be turned away. In his mind, he wasn't just hiring employees. He was curating a culture, a way of thinking, an identity for the organization. Mark considered himself an advocate of high standards. In his office, there was no room for anything that didn't align with his vision of professionalism. However, embedded in his pursuit of excellence was a bias he scarcely acknowledged, a prejudice hidden so deep that even he wasn't entirely aware of it. For him, corporate success came with a specific look, a specific way of carrying oneself, a comfort in the familiar faces and personalities that had historically populated his office. When Amanda's name appeared on the interview list, Mark barely took note of it. But as she walked into his office, he felt an unsettling wave of tension. Amanda was a young black woman, her posture straight, exuding confidence. Her presence disrupted the image he had in his mind of who should sit in that chair. Amanda's resume was impressive. She had years of experience in human resources, a strong record in conflict resolution, and a list of accomplishments that would have dazzled anyone who gave it a genuine glance. But Mark's eyes glossed over the pages, skimming without truly seeing. As Amanda sat down, she could sense the coldness radiating from him. Mark, though cordial, kept his voice clipped, his questions pointed. Without a smile or even a welcoming word, he asked his first question, almost as if challenging her mere presence. "Tell me, Amanda, how do you think your experience applies to this role?" he asked, keeping his gaze on her resume rather than her face. The tone was laced with a subtle undertone of doubt, one that Amanda couldn't ignore. Amanda took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. Despite the unwelcoming atmosphere, she spoke with a calm professionalism. "Well, as you can see, I've worked on multiple projects that involved coordinating teams, resolving conflicts, and overseeing HR policies that streamlined company culture. I believe my experience in these areas would be an asset here." But Mark barely acknowledged her words. His mind was already forming a picture, one that did not include Amanda fitting seamlessly into his carefully curated department. He peppered her with questions, each more pointed than the last, probing in a way that felt less like an interview and more like an interrogation. "Have you worked in a company as large as ours?" he asked, with a raised eyebrow, as if doubting her ability to handle the corporate dynamics. "Yes, I have," Amanda replied, maintaining her composure despite sensing his skepticism. "I've managed teams across different departments and have developed strategies for employee engagement and retention." Mark's lips pressed together in a tight line. He continued to press, questioning her familiarity with the standards expected at their firm, as though her resume hadn't already answered all these concerns. Amanda responded to each question with grace, though inside, frustration began to simmer. She could tell that Mark wasn't evaluating her skills or her qualifications. He was searching for a reason to dismiss her, to send her on her way without a second thought. Finally, Mark leaned back, his eyes narrowing. "We're looking for someone who aligns fully with our values, someone who can truly embody the company's culture," he said, his tone carrying a finality that Amanda immediately recognized. In that moment, she understood he had already decided. No matter how well she answered, no matter her qualifications, he was not going to give her a fair chance. Amanda felt her pulse quicken. She had faced bias before, subtle or overt, but it never became easier to stomach. She had worked tirelessly to build her career, pouring countless hours into proving her worth. And yet, here she was, dismissed on sight. She could feel the sting of injustice settling in, but she refused to let it show. She straightened, offering him a calm smile despite the quiet storm of emotions swirling inside her. "Well, thank you for your time, Mr. Sterling," Amanda said, her voice unwavering. She gathered her belongings, casting one last steady gaze his way. She walked out of the office with her head held high, determined not to let this encounter define her or shake her confidence. Yet as she left the building, she couldn't shake the anger that settled deep within her, a reminder that no matter how hard she worked, there would always be people like Mark who judged her based on anything but her abilities. Mark, meanwhile, leaned back in his chair, letting out a breath as the door closed behind Amanda. Another candidate dismissed, another potential misfit averted, or so he thought. As he returned to his work, the encounter with Amanda began to fade from his mind, lost in the routine of resumes, interviews, and daily office tasks. He had no inkling of the storm brewing just beyond his view, a force he would soon be unable to ignore. The power shift. As Amanda stood beside the CEO, her presence was magnetic, an unspoken authority radiating from her every movement. She took a moment to look out over the assembled employees, her gaze landing momentarily on Mark. In that split second, he could feel the weight of her stare, but she didn't let her gaze linger long. With a calm confidence, she turned her attention back to the crowd as the CEO continued his introduction. Amanda Williams has been a transformative leader in every organization she's joined, the CEO announced, his voice filled with enthusiasm. Her expertise in promoting a fair, inclusive workplace culture has made a profound impact in her previous roles, and we're thrilled to have her on board as our new HR director. Mark's heart sank lower with each word, as the realization dawned on him that Amanda wasn't just a passing presence in his life anymore. She was here to stay, with more power and authority than he could have imagined. His mind flashed back to their interview, the smug tone he'd used, the dismissive questions he'd asked her. He remembered the way he had so easily dismissed her potential simply because she didn't fit his narrow image of what an ideal employee looked like. Now his bias was staring him right in the face, and it had a name, a position, and a seat at the table. When the CEO finished his introduction, the room erupted in applause, but Mark could hardly bring himself to clap. His hands felt clammy, his stomach twisted into tight knots of embarrassment and dread. As Amanda stepped up to the microphone, she took a steadying breath before beginning to speak. Her voice was calm but powerful, each word imbued with a quiet confidence. "Thank you all for the warm welcome," she began, her gaze moving across the room, taking in each face with a respectful nod. "I'm incredibly excited to join this team and to work with each of you to build a more inclusive, supportive workplace." Her words struck a chord with the audience. Employees, many of whom had silently endured the subtle biases and limitations within the company, felt a surge of hope. Amanda wasn't just speaking as a new leader. She was addressing the invisible barriers that had kept so many from advancing, from feeling truly valued. "I believe that everyone in this room has something unique to offer," Amanda continued, "and it's my goal to ensure that each voice is heard, respected, and uplifted. I want this to be a place where talent and hard work are the only measures of success." Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He could feel the eyes of his colleagues flicking toward him, a few whispering behind their hands, their glances heavy with knowing looks. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Here he was, the gatekeeper who had once dismissed Amanda, now forced to sit and listen as she laid out her vision for a fair and inclusive workplace. After her speech, Amanda gracefully stepped down from the podium and mingled with employees. Her genuine smile and easy demeanor put people at ease, and soon she was surrounded by employees eager to welcome her and share their own hopes for the company. Mark hung back, reluctant to approach her, feeling a strange mix of resentment and regret. He watched as she engaged with others, her laughter light and genuine, contrasting starkly with the image he had held of her as someone who didn't fit his vision of professionalism. Later that afternoon, Mark found himself back in his office, but it no longer felt like his safe domain. There was a tension now, a disquiet that he couldn't shake. As he tried to refocus on his work, the door swung open, and Amanda stepped in with a polite knock. "Hello, Mark," she greeted, her tone neutral but her expression unwavering. "Ah, Amanda," Mark stammered, standing up awkwardly. "Congratulations on the new position." I didn't expect." Amanda raised an eyebrow, a small smile playing at the corner of her lips. "Didn't expect to see me here." She finished for him, her tone light, but laced with something he couldn't quite place. She stepped further into the office, her gaze steady, assessing the man who had once dismissed her without a second thought. Mark forced a strained smile, scrambling to regain some semblance of composure. "Yes, well, it's quite a surprise. But of course, I'm very happy for you. Really." Amanda's smile didn't falter, but there was a steely edge in her eyes. She could see through the shallow pleasantries, sensing his discomfort. But instead of confronting him, she simply nodded. "I wanted to stop by to let you know that, as the new HR director, I'll be conducting a review of our hiring processes. I'm sure you understand the importance of making sure our practices are inclusive and transparent." Mark felt a wave of dread settle over him. A review of hiring practices. This was his domain, his turf, the area he had controlled with an iron grip. He built a system that suited him, one that quietly excluded those who didn't fit. And now, Amanda was planning to scrutinize it. "Oh, of course," Mark said, his voice barely masking his discomfort. "But I assure you, we have high standards here. We want the best for this company, as I'm sure you do too." Amanda nodded, her gaze unwavering. "Yes, Mark, I'm sure we both want what's best for the company. That's why it's essential that our hiring practices are not only high standard but also fair and unbiased. Everyone deserves an equal opportunity to contribute and grow here." Her words were measured, professional, but they struck Mark like a punch to the gut. He realized that she was giving him a chance, a silent invitation to reflect on his own behavior and perhaps, if he were brave enough, to change. But instead of gratitude, he felt a simmering resentment, a bitter anger that this woman, whom he'd dismissed so easily, now held power over him. Amanda continued, "I believe that a fair hiring process not only benefits the company, but also enhances the culture. When people feel valued and respected, they're more motivated, more creative, and more committed." Mark nodded stiffly, his mind racing. He could feel the ground shifting beneath him, his grip on control slipping. He built his career on the belief that his way was the right way, that his judgment was beyond reproach. But now, Amanda was here, challenging everything he'd taken for granted. "I look forward to working with you, Mark," Amanda said, extending her hand. Her smile was polite, but there was a strength in her gaze that made him feel exposed, vulnerable. She knew who he was, and she wasn't afraid. With a forced smile, Mark shook her hand, feeling the cool firmness of her grip. As she left his office, he slumped into his chair, his mind spinning. This wasn't just a new boss. It was a complete shift in the company's culture, a shift that threatened to unearth the biases he had kept hidden for so long. As the day wore on, Mark felt the weight of Amanda's presence settle over the office. He overheard whispers in the hallway, employees talking excitedly about the new HR director and her plans for change. For the first time, he felt the walls of his carefully constructed world closing in, the cracks beginning to show. Shadows of the past. The meeting room felt colder than usual as Mark sat across from Amanda. Her calm, steady gaze held a quiet strength that unsettled him. This wasn't just another HR manager he could brush aside. Amanda was different. She was deliberate, perceptive, and worst of all, she knew exactly what kind of man she was facing. Mark cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure. "I agree with the need for fairness, Amanda." "Absolutely," he said, forcing a smile that felt too tight on his face. "But you know, corporate culture is nuanced. Not everyone fits. Sometimes we need to make difficult choices to keep the team aligned." Amanda nodded, but her eyes remained fixed on him, unwavering. "Nuanced. That's an interesting word, Mark. I'd like to understand what you mean by that. Could you give me an example?" Her question, though simply posed, felt like a challenge. Mark hesitated. He hadn't expected her to probe so directly. Well, I mean, certain candidates just don't always blend with the company culture, you know. It's not about qualifications. Sometimes it's more intangible. Intangible, she repeated softly, the word hanging in the air like a fine mist, almost daring him to define it. Her voice was polite, her expression calm, but there was something intense in her gaze that made his stomach twist. Mark shifted uncomfortably, realizing he was skating on thin ice. Amanda hadn't raised her voice, hadn't directly accused him of anything, but the intensity of her presence demanded honesty, transparency. He couldn't charm his way out of this. She saw through that facade, perhaps even saw the shadows lurking behind it. Amanda leaned back in her chair, folding her hands in her lap as she continued. Mark, as you know, I'm conducting a thorough review of past hiring decisions and employee records. This is standard procedure, of course. I need to familiarize myself with the company's approach, and I want to ensure we're living up to the standards of integrity and inclusivity that we claim. Mark's heart skipped a beat. A review. He forced himself to stay calm, but his mind raced with thoughts of past decisions he'd made without a second thought. Over the years, he had quietly brushed aside numerous candidates who didn't fit his narrow, unspoken criteria. There were applications he'd discarded, interviews he'd ended prematurely, all without the candidates ever knowing why. Now, Amanda would see it all. That sounds thorough, he managed to say, hoping his voice didn't betray the nervousness bubbling beneath the surface. He attempted to shift the conversation. But Amanda, we both know that corporate environments are like ecosystems. It's important to maintain a balance. Amanda tilted her head, as if studying him more closely. Balance is crucial, Mark. But balance shouldn't come at the expense of diversity or fairness. Our team should reflect a variety of backgrounds, perspectives, and experiences. That's what truly strengthens an ecosystem. Her words left no room for argument, and Mark knew it. He felt trapped, a sensation that had become disturbingly familiar since Amanda's arrival. The more he tried to deflect, the more he realized that his justifications sounded hollow, insincere. Amanda gave him a polite smile. I know this might seem challenging, but I'm here to support everyone, including you, as we move forward. It's important that we're all on the same page regarding the company's values. Her words were gentle, but Mark felt the unspoken message beneath them. There was no place for his kind of thinking in this company anymore. He wasn't being scolded, but he was being put on notice. Amanda wasn't going to tolerate bias, overt or otherwise. The meeting finally ended, but the weight of it lingered long after he left Amanda's office. The door had barely closed behind him when he found himself leaning against the wall, drawing in a shaky breath. The carefully crafted world he'd built, one where he controlled who got in and who didn't, was slipping from his grasp. That evening, Mark stayed late at the office. He found himself staring at his computer screen, reviewing old emails, applications, and notes. The more he looked, the more he realized the extent of the bias he'd allowed to shape his decisions. It wasn't something he had ever questioned before. It had been second nature, an unspoken rule he'd followed without thinking. But Amanda's arrival had thrown that into harsh relief. Her calm, questioning presence had forced him to confront the uncomfortable truth about himself. And the review she was conducting meant she would soon see the biases reflected in black and white, recorded in every rejected application, every note he'd scrawled in the margins of a resume. He thought back to his early years at the company. Fresh out of business school, he'd been eager to make his mark, to prove his worth. But somewhere along the way, he'd started to believe that he alone knew what was best for the company, that he had the right to decide who belonged and who didn't. It had given him a sense of power, of control, that he'd grown to rely on. And now, that control was slipping away. A knock on his office door jolted him from his thoughts. He looked up to see Alex, a younger colleague from the marketing department, peeking in. Hey, Mark, you still here? Alex asked, a little surprised. It's pretty late. Mark forced a smile. Yeah, just catching up on some things. What's up? Alex stepped in, looking a bit hesitant. Actually, I just wanted to say, I thought it was great what Amanda said today about inclusivity and making sure everyone's voice is heard. It's refreshing, you know. Mark's smile faltered. He hadn't realized that Amanda's words had resonated with others so deeply. Yes, of course. It's important. Alex nodded, looking at him with a hopeful expression. Yeah, I think it's about time. There's a lot of talent out there that just needs a fair chance. And well, it makes me feel like maybe things are changing, you know. As Alex left, Mark was left alone with his thoughts, the weight of what he'd heard sinking in. For years, he'd thought his way was best, that his judgments were infallible. But now, he was faced with the painful reality that others didn't share his views, and they were eager for change. The power of reflection. The next day, Mark arrived at work early, his mind still churning from the previous night. As he entered the office, he noticed that Amanda's door was open. She was already there, reviewing documents and making notes, completely absorbed in her work. He hesitated outside her office, then took a deep breath and knocked on the open door. Amanda looked up, surprised but welcoming. Mark, come in. What can I do for you? He stepped inside, feeling an uncomfortable sense of vulnerability. I wanted to talk about the review you're conducting. Amanda closed her notebook, giving him her full attention. Of course. Is there something specific on your mind? Mark struggled to find the right words, his carefully crafted defenses crumbling. I've been here a long time, Amanda. I've always tried to do what I thought was best for the company. But maybe I haven't always been fair. Amanda's expression softened. Recognizing that is an important first step, Mark. Bias can be subtle, and sometimes we don't realize it's there until we're forced to confront it. He nodded, swallowing hard. I didn't see it before. I thought I was protecting the culture. But maybe I was just protecting my own comfort. Amanda nodded. It's easy to mistake comfort for progress. But true growth requires us to step out of our comfort zones, to question our assumptions. That's why I'm here, Mark, to help us all build something better together. There was a long pause as Mark absorbed her words, the weight of them settling deep within him. He'd spent years avoiding this kind of self-reflection, shielding himself with layers of authority and ego. But now, with Amanda's presence and her quiet determination, he felt those layers peeling away. I want to do better, he said finally, his voice barely more than a whisper. But I don't know how. Amanda's smile was gentle, understanding. The fact that you're willing to try is a powerful start. And I'll be here to guide you, Mark. We all have blind spots, but together, we can learn to see more clearly. As he left her office, Mark felt a strange mix of relief and apprehension. The road ahead was uncertain, and he knew it wouldn't be easy to unlearn the habits and biases he cultivated over the years. But for the first time, he felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, he could become part of the change Amanda was bringing. In the days that followed, Mark found himself reevaluating every decision, every interaction, every assumption he'd once held as unchangeable truth. He knew he had a long way to go, but with Amanda's support and his newfound humility, he was willing to take the first steps toward becoming the leader he should have been all along. Confronting the past. The next few weeks were unlike anything Mark had experienced in his career. The familiar rhythm of his work life had been disrupted, replaced by a period of intense self-reflection and discomfort. Each day, Amanda's presence served as a reminder of the things he had overlooked, ignored, or simply didn't want to see. It was like looking into a mirror that showed his past actions without the distortion of his own biases, and the reflection was not flattering. One afternoon, Mark received an email from Amanda, asking him to join a meeting with her and the executive team. His heart sank as he read the message. He knew what this was about. She was going to confront him with the findings from her review of his past hiring decisions, and he had no choice but to face the consequences. Mark arrived at the conference room early, anxiety gnawing at his insides. As he waited, he found himself thinking about all the people he had turned away over the years, candidates he dismissed without even giving them a fair chance. He could recall faces, resumes, names, each one representing a missed opportunity, not just for the company, but for him to grow as a leader and a person. Amanda entered the room with a calm yet serious expression, carrying a thick folder of documents. Behind her, several members of the executive team filed in, their faces a mix of curiosity and concern. Amanda took her seat across from Mark and opened the folder, spreading out a series of documents on the table. "Thank you for coming, everyone," she began, her tone steady but purposeful. "As part of my review, I've examined hiring practices across the company, including the records and notes from several managers. Mark, today I'd like to address some of the patterns I've noticed in your department." Mark's stomach twisted as Amanda looked directly at him, her gaze unwavering. She held up a series of resumes, each marked with notes and annotations he recognized as his own. "Over the past few years, there's been a recurring trend in the candidates you've chosen to reject," she said. Each of these individuals was highly qualified, and in several cases, they were the most qualified candidates in the pool. Yet, for reasons that often appear subjective or unrelated to the job requirements, you turned them down. Mark could feel the weight of the executive's eyes on him, their silent judgment pressing down on him like a physical force. He opened his mouth to defend himself, to explain that he was only trying to uphold the company culture, but the words felt hollow even before they left his lips. Most of these candidates, Amanda continued, were either people of color or individuals from underrepresented backgrounds. In each case, there are notes about cultural fit or alignment with company standards, terms that, when used in this way, are often euphemisms for personal bias. Mark felt a flush rise to his cheeks, a mixture of shame and defensiveness. "Amanda, I thought I was acting in the best interest of the company," he said, his voice shaky. "I believed I was selecting people who would fit into our team dynamics." Amanda didn't waver. "But that's exactly the issue, Mark. Your definition of fit seems to exclude people who don't look or think like you. You may have believed you were protecting the company, but in reality, you were limiting its growth, its diversity, and its potential to innovate." One of the executives, Stara, cleared her throat. "Mark, I have to say, I find this deeply troubling," she said. "We pride ourselves on being a forward-thinking, inclusive company. If what Amanda is saying is true, then your actions have been at odds with our core values." Mark's mouth went dry as he looked around the table, realizing the gravity of what was happening. This was more than a reprimand. This was a reckoning. Amanda was not just calling him out. She was laying bare the consequences of his actions for everyone to see. "Inclusivity isn't just a policy we put on our website," Amanda said, her voice soft but firm. "It's a commitment we make every day to ensure that everyone, regardless of their background, has an equal chance to succeed here. When we fail to uphold that commitment, we lose more than just potential hires. We lose our integrity." The words hit Mark like a punch to the gut. He had always considered himself a man of integrity, someone who believed in doing the right thing. But now, faced with the evidence of his own actions, he could no longer deny that he had failed to live up to that ideal. He lowered his gaze, unable to meet Amanda's eyes. I didn't realize the impact of my actions," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I thought I was doing what was best." Amanda's expression softened slightly. "Mark, it's not too late to make things right. Recognizing the problem is the first step, but change requires more than just acknowledgement. It requires action." Mark nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I want to make amends," he said, his voice trembling with a mix of shame and determination. "I don't know where to start, but I'm willing to learn." After the meeting, Amanda approached Mark privately. She looked at him with a mixture of compassion and resolve, understanding the weight of what he was going through. but not allowing him to escape accountability. "Mark," she began gently, "this is a hard journey, but it's one worth taking. Bias is something we all carry, consciously or unconsciously, but we have to work to unlearn it. I'm here to help you, but you have to be willing to put in the effort." Mark looked at her, his pride finally shattered. "Amanda, I know I've been wrong, and I know I have to do better. Can you help me start over?" Amanda nodded. "The first thing we'll do is set up training sessions, not just for you, but for the entire team. This isn't just about you, Mark. It's about creating a culture where everyone feels seen, respected, and valued." Mark felt a glimmer of hope at her words, grateful for her willingness to guide him. "Thank you, Amanda. I'm willing to do whatever it takes." Amanda smiled, a soft, encouraging expression that conveyed her belief in his potential to change. "Good. Change is never easy, but I believe you can make it. This journey will be difficult, but if you stay committed, you'll find it's also deeply rewarding." In the days that followed, Mark threw himself into the process of self-reflection and education. He attended every training session Amanda organized, listening intently to the speakers who discussed topics like unconscious bias, inclusivity, and the importance of representation. For the first time, he understood the profound impact of his past actions, not just on the people he had rejected, but on the entire company. Amanda noticed his dedication, and over time, her cautious support turned into genuine encouragement. She saw that Mark was not only remorseful, but was making a conscious effort to unlearn his old ways. Together, they worked on restructuring the hiring process, implementing new policies that would ensure a fairer, more inclusive approach to recruitment. One afternoon, Amanda invited Mark to a meeting with several employees who had experienced discrimination within the company. It was an emotional experience, as each person shared their story, the hurt they had felt, and the resilience it had taken to stay in an environment where they didn't always feel welcome. Mark listened, his heart heavy with guilt and remorse. He had never realized the extent of the pain he had caused, the wounds that his biases had left behind. But as he listened, he felt a renewed sense of purpose, a commitment to ensure that no one else would have to experience that kind of exclusion. At the end of the meeting, one of the employees approached him, a young black woman who had been with the company for several years. She looked him in the eyes, her gaze both challenging and hopeful. "Mark, I want to believe that you're changing," she said, "but words aren't enough. We need to see action." Mark nodded, his voice steady as he replied, "I understand. And I promise, I'll do everything in my power to make sure that this company becomes a place where everyone feels they belong." As he walked away from the meeting, Mark felt a profound sense of responsibility settle over him. He had made mistakes, serious mistakes, but he was finally ready to own them, to confront the shadows of his past, and work toward a better future. Rebuilding trust. Mark's journey of transformation was far from over. Though he had acknowledged his mistakes and committed to change, he understood that repairing the damage he had caused would require more than good intentions. It would take consistent action, humility, and a willingness to face uncomfortable truths. Amanda, true to her word, continued to support him, but she was firm in her expectations. She challenged him to think deeply, to question assumptions he hadn't even realized he held, and to make tangible improvements that would create a lasting impact. She made it clear that this wasn't just about appearances. It was about cultivating a genuinely inclusive workplace. One afternoon, Amanda called Mark into her office for a meeting. Her demeanor was professional but warm, a signal that she saw his efforts and respected his commitment to change. "Mark, I've noticed the progress you've made," she began, looking at him directly. "But there's still a lot of work to be done, and this isn't something you can tackle alone. We need to get the entire team involved, and more importantly, we need to rebuild the trust of those who have been affected by past practices, including yourself." Mark nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and nervousness. He had been wondering when Amanda would address this topic, and he was ready to take the next step, no matter how challenging it might be. "I've been thinking a lot about that, Amanda," he admitted. "I realize now that my actions didn't just impact the people I turned away or the colleagues I dismissed. They affected everyone in this company. I want to make amends, but I'm not sure where to start." Amanda leaned forward, her gaze intense but encouraging. "Start by listening, Mark. We're going to hold a series of listening sessions with employees from different backgrounds, departments, and positions. These sessions will allow them to share their experiences openly, without fear of retaliation or judgment. You'll attend every session, and you'll listen. No defensiveness, no justifying, just listening." The idea made Mark's stomach twist with anxiety. He knew that some of the feedback would be difficult to hear, but he also understood that it was essential if he wanted to build an environment of trust and respect. The first listening session was held in a large conference room, with chairs arranged in a circle to create a more open, comfortable atmosphere. As employees filed in, Mark felt his nerves spike, but he steadied himself with a deep breath, reminding himself that this was part of his commitment to change. Amanda introduced the session, explaining that this was an opportunity for employees to share their experiences, concerns, and suggestions. She assured everyone that the conversation would be confidential, and that their voices would be valued and respected. The first employee to speak was a woman named Carla, a software engineer who had been with the company for 6 years. She recounted instances where she felt overlooked for promotions despite her qualifications and hard work. She talked about how she'd watched others, mostly men and mostly white, advance faster than her, even though her performance reviews were consistently excellent. "There were times," Carla said, her voice wavering slightly, "when I questioned my own worth. I wondered if I was doing something wrong, if there was something about me that didn't fit with the culture here. But now, I realized that it wasn't about me. It was about a system that wasn't built to include people like me." Her words hit Mark like a punch to the gut. He could see the pain in Carla's eyes, the resilience she had shown in staying with a company that didn't fully value her contributions. He felt a deep sense of shame, but he also recognized that this was a crucial moment for him to grow. As the session continued, other employees shared similar stories. A young man from the marketing department described how he'd been the only person of color in his team and how he often felt isolated, his ideas dismissed without explanation. Another woman talked about the casual jokes she'd overheard in the office, remarks that made her feel uncomfortable and marginalized. Each story added another layer to Mark's understanding of the pervasive issues within the company. He realized that his biases had not only influenced his own actions, but had contributed to a culture where others felt alienated and undervalued. When the session ended, Mark felt emotionally drained but grateful. He thanked everyone for their honesty and assured them that he was committed to making meaningful changes. "Thank you for trusting me enough to share your experiences," he said, his voice heavy with sincerity. "I know that words aren't enough, and I don't expect forgiveness overnight. But I promise to do everything I can to ensure that no one else has to go through what you've endured. This is my responsibility, and I won't back down from it." In the weeks that followed, Mark and Amanda worked closely together to implement changes based on the feedback from the listening sessions. They introduced new policies designed to promote fairness and inclusion, including a revamped hiring process that would prioritize diversity and eliminate unconscious biases. Mark made it a point to involve employees from diverse backgrounds in the decision-making process, recognizing that their perspectives were invaluable. He also began hosting regular check-in meetings with employees, where they could voice any concerns or suggestions. These meetings weren't just a formality. They were an opportunity for Mark to continue learning, to stay accountable, and to foster a culture where everyone felt valued. One of the most significant changes was the introduction of mentorship programs aimed at supporting employees from underrepresented backgrounds in their professional development. Mark personally volunteered as a mentor, seeing it as an opportunity to not only help others, but also to continue his own growth. He understood that true change would require continuous effort, and he was committed to staying on this path. Amanda watched Mark's transformation with a mixture of pride and satisfaction. She had seen many people promise change, only to revert to their old ways once the initial pressure faded. But Mark was different. He was genuinely committed, and his actions spoke louder than any words ever could. Months passed, and slowly but surely, the culture within the company began to shift. Employees started to notice the difference, not just in the policies but in the atmosphere. They felt more comfortable speaking up, more confident that their voices would be heard and respected. The changes weren't perfect, and there were still challenges to overcome, but there was a renewed sense of hope and unity. One day, during a company-wide meeting, Amanda took the stage to address the entire staff. She spoke about the progress they had made, the work that still lay ahead, and the commitment to creating a workplace that celebrated diversity and inclusion. Then, to everyone's surprise, she invited Mark to speak. Mark hesitated for a moment, feeling the familiar nerves rise up within him. But as he looked around at his colleagues, he realized that this was no longer just about him. It was about everyone in that room, and the journey they had all embarked on together. He stepped up to the microphone, his voice steady and sincere. "I know that I've made mistakes in the past," he began, his gaze sweeping over the audience. "I know that I've hurt people, whether intentionally or not. But I want you all to know that I am committed to being a better leader, a better colleague, and a better person. This journey has been challenging, but it's also been one of the most rewarding experiences of my life." He paused, gathering his thoughts before continuing. "I want to thank Amanda for her guidance and her patience, and I want to thank each of you for trusting me enough to give me a second chance. I promise that I will not take that trust for granted. Together, we're building something meaningful, a company where everyone belongs, where everyone's contributions are valued, and where we can all grow and succeed together." The room erupted in applause, a genuine show of support and appreciation. For the first time in a long time, Mark felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that he had made a real difference, not just for himself, but for everyone around him. As he stepped away from the microphone, he caught Amanda's eye, and she gave him a small nod of approval. In that moment, Mark knew that he had finally earned her respect, not through words, but through action. Later that day, Mark received an email from Carla, the software engineer who had shared her experiences during the first listening session. The message was simple but profound. "Thank you for listening. I see the changes you're making, and it gives me hope. Keep going." Mark sat back in his chair, a sense of peace washing over him. He knew there was still work to be done, and he was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. He had found a new purpose, one rooted in empathy, understanding, and a genuine desire to uplift those around him. And for the first time, he felt truly proud of the person he was becoming. A legacy of change. Months turned into a year, and Mark's dedication to creating an inclusive and supportive workplace never wavered. The company had changed in profound ways, but what surprised him the most was how much he had changed as a person. He had gone from a man blind to his own biases to someone deeply aware of the importance of diversity, respect, and understanding. More than that, he had learned the power of humility and listening, traits he had never valued as much before. The transformation wasn't just about new policies and mentorship programs. It was about a shift in the company's culture, where people genuinely felt valued and understood. Amanda's vision of an inclusive workplace had become a reality, not only because of her leadership but because she had inspired others to believe in the same vision. Now, people like Carla and other employees who once felt marginalized were thriving. They'd brought new ideas, perspectives, and energy that helped the company grow and innovate in ways that Mark couldn't have imagined before. One evening, Amanda called Mark into her office, a thoughtful expression on her face. He walked in, curious but slightly nervous. Amanda had a way of bringing up important discussions at unexpected times. "Mark, we've made remarkable progress," she began, folding her hands and looking at him with a mixture of pride and something else he couldn't quite place. "I wanted to tell you that the board has been incredibly impressed with the work you've done, especially considering where we started. They see the impact you've had, and so do I." Mark felt a rush of gratitude and relief, but Amanda wasn't done yet. "There's something else, too," she continued. "The board and I have been discussing the idea of launching a new initiative, an outreach and diversity program designed to help other companies learn from our journey. We're thinking of calling it the Diversity Leadership Institute." Mark's eyebrows lifted in surprise. "That sounds incredible. But how would it work?" "The idea," Amanda explained, "is to create a space where leaders from other companies can come, learn, and take away strategies to make their own workplaces more inclusive. We want to share our experiences, both the successes and the challenges, and help others avoid the same mistakes." She paused, letting the gravity of her words sink in. "And we want you to lead it, Mark." For a moment, Mark was speechless. The idea of taking on such a role, to become a mentor and guide to others, was something he hadn't anticipated. It felt like a monumental responsibility, but also a unique opportunity, a chance to create an even greater impact beyond the walls of their own company. "Amanda," he finally said, his voice thick with emotion, "I don't know what to say. I never would have expected this. Do you really think I'm ready for something like that?" Amanda smiled, her eyes filled with reassurance. "I wouldn't have offered it to you if I didn't believe you were the right person. You've come a long way, Mark. You've done the work, not just on policies, but on yourself. You understand the importance of this, not just intellectually, but personally. That's what will make you a great leader for this initiative." Mark took a deep breath, feeling a sense of both honor and responsibility. He thought about all the people he could help, about the possibility of sparing others from the mistakes he had made, and the chance to leave a legacy that went beyond personal redemption. "I would be honored," he said finally, a sense of purpose settling over him. "I want to help others avoid the blind spots I had. I want to show them that change is possible." The Diversity Leadership Institute launched 6 months later, and it quickly gained traction. Leaders from various industries signed up, curious to learn how they could foster a culture of respect, equality, and inclusion within their own companies. Mark took to his new role with a passion he hadn't felt before. He led workshops, shared his journey openly, and encouraged participants to confront their own biases and assumptions. In one of the first workshops, he shared the story of his initial encounter with Amanda, recounting how his own biases had blinded him to her capabilities and the lessons he had learned along the way. His honesty resonated with the participants, many of whom recognized similar patterns in their own behavior. By showing his vulnerability, Mark allowed others to confront their own flaws without fear or shame, setting the tone for meaningful growth. The program included sessions on understanding unconscious bias, fostering an inclusive work environment, and implementing diversity initiatives that weren't just performative but embedded in the company's culture. Over time, Mark watched as leaders who initially approached the program with reluctance or defensiveness began to embrace the process. They asked tough questions, shared their own struggles, and left with a renewed commitment to creating change in their organizations. One of the participants, a CEO named Sarah, approached Mark after a session with tears in her eyes. "Mark, I've been in leadership for over 20 years, and I thought I knew what it meant to lead. But I realized today that I've been blind to so much. Thank you for showing me that it's never too late to change." Mark felt a surge of gratitude and pride. This was the impact he had once only dreamed of making. By sharing his journey and the lessons he'd learned, he was helping others see the importance of building workplaces where everyone could thrive, regardless of their background. Back at his company, the changes continued. Carla and others like her rose through the ranks, their talents finally recognized and valued. The mentorship programs flourished, and employees took pride in being part of an organization that genuinely cared about their well-being. Amanda, watching from the sidelines, felt an immense sense of satisfaction. She had believed in Mark when no one else did, and now she saw the fruits of that belief in every corner of the company. During one of the company's annual meetings, Amanda took the stage to deliver a speech that would be remembered for years to come. She acknowledged the progress they had made as a team and the role that each person had played in creating a more inclusive, supportive environment. And today, she said, her voice filled with warmth and conviction, I want to recognize one individual who has demonstrated the true meaning of growth, humility, and leadership. Mark, would you please join me on stage? The audience erupted into applause as Mark walked up, his face reflecting a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. Standing beside Amanda, he looked out at the crowd, his colleagues, his mentors, and even those who had once been skeptical of his journey. Amanda placed a hand on his shoulder. Mark has shown us that true leadership isn't about perfection. It's about the willingness to learn, to grow, and to make amends. His journey has been one of courage, resilience, and dedication, and he has become a role model for all of us. Mark felt a swell of emotion as he accepted the recognition, not just for himself, but for everyone who had supported him along the way. He knew that his journey wasn't over. There would always be more to learn, more to change. But he also knew that he was exactly where he was meant to be. As the applause died down, Mark took the microphone, his voice steady and filled with conviction. I'm grateful for this recognition, he began, his eyes sweeping over the audience. But this isn't just about me. It's about all of us, about the culture we're building together. Change isn't easy, and it doesn't happen overnight. But if we're willing to listen, to learn, and to treat each other with respect, there's nothing we can't accomplish. He paused, his gaze meeting Amanda's with a look of profound gratitude. Thank you, Amanda, for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. And thank you to each and every one of you for giving me a second chance. Together, we're creating a legacy of kindness, equality, and respect. And I couldn't be prouder to be a part of it. As he stepped off the stage to a standing ovation, Mark felt a deep sense of peace. His journey had come full circle, but he knew that this was only the beginning. The company, the Diversity Leadership Institute, and his own personal growth, all of these were just the first steps in a much larger mission. Mark had once been a man who couldn't see beyond his own biases, but now he was a leader, a mentor, and an advocate for change. And as he looked around at the faces of his colleagues, he knew that together, they would continue to build a future defined not by prejudice or division, but by understanding, unity, and the unwavering belief in each other's potential.